Alpha King caught his beta-S daughter crying in the kitchen. The truth about her scars destroyed him. Within, silence lingered like a living thing, moving through empty halls and dimly lit corridors. It was a home of power, of kings and secrets, yet in its quiet corners, grief and loneliness often hid. In the great kitchen, a soft light flickered. Candles lined the long wooden tables, their flames trembling against the cold stone walls. And there, on the far side of the room, a young girl knelt on the floor. Her hands were pressed to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She wore a simple dress, faded at the edges, and her hair fell in loose waves around her face, hiding scars that told stories she had never spoken aloud. No one had seen her cry before, not in the halls of the castle, not among the servants, and certainly not in front of the Alpha King himself. She was the daughter of a beta, known for her quiet obedience and careful manners. Yet here in this empty kitchen she allowed herself the small mercy of tears. They fell freely, tracing the paths of old wounds, both on her skin and in her heart. The Alpha King entered silently, his boots echoing softly against the stone floor. He was a figure of strength and command, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just above his sharp eyes. His presence usually brought order and fear in equal measure. Yet tonight, he paused at the doorway, something unusual tugging at him. Curiosity, perhaps, or an unfamiliar concern. He watched her for a long moment, studying the slight tremor of her body, the quiet despair in her posture. No one had ever dared to weep like this in his castle, and yet he did not speak, did not interrupt. Instead, he simply allowed the sight to sink in, as if he were taking measure of something he had not known existed in his world. The girl did not notice him at first. Her sobs were soft, almost a whisper, drowned out by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. But then a shadow fell over her hands and she froze, her breath catching. Slowly, she lifted her head. The Alpha King stood before her, his expression unreadable, yet his eyes carried a weight that made her chest tighten. "You shouldn't cry alone," he said finally, his voice low and steady like a calm before a storm. There was no accusation in his tone, only observation. "Especially not in a place like this." The girl hesitated, unsure whether to hide or to speak. Her hands trembled as she wiped at her face, trying to regain some semblance of composure. I was just—" Her voice faltered, fragile as a candle flame. She could not complete the thought, could not admit the depth of her sorrow. The Alpha King stepped closer, though not threateningly. He crouched slightly to meet her level, and in the dim candlelight she saw the storm in his eyes, power tempered by something gentler, something that surprised her. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will harm you." She wanted to believe him, yet years of caution and fear made her hesitate. Scars, she had learned, were reminders not only of what had happened but of who she had to become to survive. And this man, this Alpha who commanded the entire pack, had power over everyone. Even him, she thought, she could not fully trust. I am used to being alone," she whispered, barely audible. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. There was a flicker of something unspoken, a recognition of pain, of loneliness mirrored in his own past, perhaps. "No one should be alone here," he replied. "Not while I am awake, not while I am watching." The girl's heart skipped. She did not know why, but his words stirred something inside her, a mixture of fear and comfort that was confusing and new. She had grown up in the shadow of power, always careful, always silent. And now, for the first time, someone of that power seemed to see her, really see her without judgment. She swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. I didn't mean to make a mess," she said. Her voice was fragile, but there was a small spark of defiance hidden beneath. She would not allow herself to be pitied, not even by him. He shook his head slowly, a shadow of a smile brushing his lips. "You are not a mess. And tears do not make you weak." His voice was firm yet gentle, a strange contradiction that made her chest tighten. "Scars do not define you either." The words hit her in a way she had not expected. They were true, yet she had spent so long believing otherwise. She lowered her gaze, touching the faint marks on her arms and face, each one a memory she wished she could forget. And yet, in his presence, they felt less like shame and more like evidence of survival, of endurance. The castle, normally cold and unyielding, seemed to soften in that moment. The fire's glow danced across the walls, and for a brief instant the world outside, its politics, its power struggles, its dangers, faded into insignificance. All that remained was the quiet understanding between them, the unspoken acknowledgement of pain and resilience. Suddenly, a distant noise shattered the fragile calm. A clatter of footsteps echoed down the hall outside the kitchen. The girl stiffened, eyes wide, and the Alpha King's posture shifted. His instincts, honed by years of leadership and survival, flared to life. He did not need to ask who approached. He knew that in a castle like this, shadows always carried secrets. The girl's heart raced, and she instinctively moved closer to him, as if drawn by some invisible thread. He noticed, and a small, almost imperceptible tension softened in his shoulders. She was frightened, yet in seeking safety, she revealed a trust she had rarely given. And he, despite himself, felt the weight of responsibility press heavier upon his chest. The footsteps paused at the doorway, and a figure appeared, blurred in the candlelight. The girl's breath caught in her throat. The Alpha King's gaze sharpened, his body a living barrier between her and whatever threat lingered outside. But even as he prepared to confront it, the figure vanished back into shadow, an unspoken warning, a reminder that her past was not entirely behind her. She exhaled slowly, trembling, and he did not release the quiet vigilance in his eyes. "They are not gone entirely," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "The past, it lingers." Her fingers brushed against the edge of the table, grounding herself. I thought it was over," she admitted softly. "I thought the scars, the pain, I thought it would end with time." He studied her, and for the first time a flicker of something raw and human crossed his usually imperious face, regret, sorrow, and a longing he rarely allowed himself to feel. "Time does not heal everything," he said quietly. "Sometimes it hides it, buries it, until it is ready to rise again." The words struck her deeply. She had always believed that hiding, avoiding, and enduring silently was the only path to survival, but his presence, his unexpected empathy made her reconsider. Perhaps there was another way. Perhaps strength could coexist with vulnerability. She lifted her eyes to his, meeting a gaze that was both commanding and strangely tender. Why do you care?" she asked, the question escaping before caution could stop it. The Alpha King's jaw tightened slightly, and he looked away for a moment, as if weighing the answer. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before, almost a whisper. "Because no one, not even a beta's child, should carry the weight of the world alone." Her breath caught. The words, simple yet profound, stirred something long buried inside her, a yearning for protection, for acknowledgement, for a bond she had thought impossible. And in that instant, a subtle shift occurred. The invisible walls around her heart, built brick by brick through years of fear and caution, trembled ever so slightly. The castle seemed to grow quieter still, the shadows leaning closer, as if listening. And for the first time, she felt not only fear but possibility, a chance that her story, so long defined by pain and scars, might yet change. Outside, the wind whispered through the spires, carrying with it the faint scent of the forest and the promise of secrets yet untold. And the Alpha King, standing sentinel at her side, could not shake the feeling that this meeting, this fragile, unexpected connection, was the beginning of something far larger than either of them had imagined. The girl's tears slowed, replaced by a cautious curiosity, and the Alpha King, for the first time in many years, felt a pang of something he had long denied: hope. Not only for her but for himself, for the possibility that even in a world of power, darkness, and ancient grudges, two souls could find a fragile light in each other. As they remained in the flickering candlelight, neither speaking, the castle seemed to hold its breath. Outside, shadows shifted, hinting at dangers yet to come, and though the kitchen was silent, both knew, without words, that nothing would ever be the same again. Cliffhanger. A distant rustle echoed through the halls. Someone or something watched them from the shadows. The Alpha King's hand instinctively moved toward the hilt of his sword, and the girl's pulse quickened. Whatever it would change everything, and the fragile trust between them would soon be tested. The castle's halls had never felt so alive, or so tense. Word of the Alpha King's interest in the Beta's daughter quietly spread, whispered among the servants and guards like a gentle wind through the ancient corridors. Yet no one dared interfere. The girl, scarred and quiet, moved through the castle as if part shadow herself, careful to remain unseen, careful to keep the world at a distance. But the Alpha King had noticed. More than noticed, he could not stop thinking of her. There was something in the way she carried herself, a fragile defiance, a quiet courage that demanded attention. And those scars, faint, pale, yet unforgettable, spoke of trials and suffering far beyond her years. He had seen pain before, true pain, but hers unsettled him in ways he did not expect. It was a gray morning when he found her again, in the castle library. The room smelled of old parchment and firewood, sunlight spilling through the tall windows and casting soft shadows across the shelves. She sat on the floor, her back against a shelf, head bent over a book she barely read. Her fingers traced the lines of the pages as if the words could comfort her. The Alpha King stepped inside, his presence heavy yet calm. "You spend too much time alone," he said. His voice carried no anger, only observation. She startled, closing the book quickly. I'm reading," she said softly, unsure whether to be defiant or timid. He crouched slightly, resting his hands on his knees. "Reading is good," he said, "but you must not forget life exists beyond these pages. The world does not wait, even for someone as cautious as you." Her gaze fell to the floor, ashamed. She had grown so used to hiding, to keeping herself small. Yet the Alpha King's attention, though imposing, felt oddly protective. She did not understand why he sought her presence, why he lingered like a shadow she could not escape. "You hide your scars well," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "But I see them. I see what they tell me." She froze, fingers curling around the edge of the book. The castle had taught her caution. No one, not even her father, had ever spoken of her scars in this way. They were meant to be hidden, erased from the world's sight. Yet here he was, staring at her as if he could read the stories etched into her skin. They are nothing," she whispered, almost too softly to hear. "Just marks from the past." He shook his head, his dark eyes firm yet thoughtful. "Nothing leaves such a mark without reason, and nothing that causes such pain is ever truly nothing." Her chest tightened. Pain had become a quiet companion in her life. She had learned to endure, to move through the world without complaint, to hide the evidence of suffering behind a mask of quiet obedience. Yet the Alpha King refused to let her pretend. In his presence, she could not escape herself. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sunlight spilled across the library floor, catching in her hair and illuminating the faint lines of her scars. He studied them, and in that silent observation he saw not weakness but resilience. Not shame, but survival. "Why do you care?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Why me?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he regarded her with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. "Because no one should endure pain alone," he said at last. "Because power does not mean ignoring the suffering in those around you. And because I am not indifferent to what you carry." Her breath caught. Words like these had never been offered to her. Protection, concern, understanding, they were foreign to her, almost frightening in their rarity. Yet beneath the fear there was a flicker of something she could not name, a spark of hope, fragile but persistent. Before she could reply, a soft whisper reached her ears. Not a voice, not entirely, more like a memory stirring in the shadows. She froze, glancing toward the dark corners of the library, and the Alpha King stiffened beside her. Both sensed it. Something lingered beyond the walls, something tied to the girl's past. "The past never truly leaves," he said quietly. "It waits, hidden, until it can speak again." She nodded, unable to articulate the mix of fear and recognition that fluttered inside her. Her scars were more than skin deep. They carried a story, a betrayal, a loss, a shadow that had followed her across the years. And though she had tried to hide it, the Alpha King saw. Over the next days, he began to observe her more closely. He watched how she moved through the castle, careful, alert, yet often drawn to quiet corners, places where shadows lingered and time seemed slower. He noticed how she flinched when certain names were mentioned, how her gaze darkened at faint reminders of old fears. He watched without imposing, allowing her the space she seemed to need, but never letting her forget that he was near. At first, she resisted. She avoided him when she could, ducked behind doors, and whispered to the servants rather than speak freely. Yet even her avoidance did not deter him. There was a tension between them, a quiet struggle of proximity and distance. Each glance, each carefully measured word, carried more meaning than either dared acknowledge. One evening, the Alpha King found her alone in the castle gardens. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the twisted trees and stone paths. She was seated on a bench, staring at the fountain as though it held some secret she could uncover. "You come here often," he said softly, stepping into the moonlight. She did not turn immediately. "It is peaceful," she murmured, "safer than most places." He sat beside her, a careful distance away. "Peace is rare in this world," he said. "You must learn to take it where you can." Her gaze finally met his, and she saw something there, something unfamiliar yet compelling. Concern, understanding, perhaps even something like respect. The feelings were confusing, tangled with fear and longing. She had been taught to distrust men of power, yet here he was, a king among kings, offering none of the cruelty she expected. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the whisper of leaves in the night breeze and the quiet trickle of the fountain. And in that silence, the girl felt the weight of her loneliness ease, if only slightly. But the night was not without warning. A sudden movement near the tree line caught her eye, a shadow flitting between the branches. Her pulse quickened, and she instinctively moved closer to him. The Alpha King's hand hovered near hers, tense, ready to act. "Who's there?" he called, voice low but commanding. The shadow did not respond. It disappeared as quickly as it came, leaving only a sense of unease in its wake. She shivered, and he noticed, wrapping an arm lightly around her shoulders, not as a captor but as a protector. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "And no harm will come while I am near." Her heart beat fast, a strange mixture of fear and relief. She had never felt such safety before, not with her father, not with the servants, not in the world beyond the castle walls. And yet she could not ignore the feeling that her past, or something tied to it, was closer than ever. Over the following days, the Alpha King's attention became a steady presence in her life. He did not force her to speak, did not pry unnecessarily, but his presence was a constant reassurance, a reminder that she was seen. And slowly, cautiously, she began to respond. Small words, fleeting smiles, brief moments of shared silence. Each interaction deepened the fragile bond forming between them. Yet danger lingered. The castle was never truly safe, and the girl's scars were a reminder that the past could reach her at any moment. The Alpha King knew this, and though he tried to shield her, he understood that protection alone was not enough. She would need to confront her past, face the shadows that haunted her if she was to survive, and if their bond was to endure. Late one night, as she slept in a small chamber near the castle's east wing, the Alpha King stood silently outside her door. Moonlight traced the outline of his tall figure, and his thoughts were consumed by her. Her scars, her past, her quiet courage, they had awakened something in him that he had long kept buried. something softer, more human, yet no less intense. He had ruled with strength, with fear, with authority that brooked no challenge. But this girl, scarred, quiet, resilient, had stirred emotions he had not felt in years. He wondered if she realized the impact she had, if she could understand that even her pain, her very scars, were enough to draw his attention, to command his care. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that the events unfolding were only the beginning. Her past was not done with her, and neither was the castle's web of secrets. Shadows lingered, waiting, watching, ready to rise. But for now, he remained, guarding her silently, watching over her as she slept. And though neither spoke of it, a quiet promise was made between them, that she would not face the darkness alone, not while he lived. Cliffhanger. A distant whisper echoed through the castle, faint but unmistakable. It was a name, her name, carried on the wind. And with it came a memory long buried, a shadow of the past that threatened to drag them both into danger. The Alpha King's eyes darkened, and he knew that the fragile peace they had found could shatter at any moment. The castle was no longer merely stone and shadow. It had become a stage for secrets and fears, where past and present intertwined. The Beta's daughter moved cautiously through its halls, the weight of her scars heavy in her mind, yet lighter than before. The Alpha King's presence lingered like a silent shield, and though she resisted the attention at times, she could not deny the strange comfort it brought. It was a cold evening when he found her again, standing at the balcony overlooking the forest. The wind tugged at her hair and dress, carrying whispers from the distant trees. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, lost in thought, but the Alpha King's shadow fell beside her before she could speak. "You are restless tonight," he said softly, his voice blending with the sigh of the wind. She turned slightly, reluctant to reveal her unease. "The forest, it calls to me sometimes," she admitted. "It feels familiar." He studied her, noting the quiet longing in her eyes. "Familiarity can be dangerous," he warned, "especially when the past lingers within it." Her fingers clenched the railing, memories tugging at her mind. Old betrayals, harsh words, the cruel hands that had left their mark on her. Her scars were not just reminders of pain, but echoes of events she had never truly understood. And yet, he had seen them. He had not flinched, had not recoiled. Instead, he had acknowledged them, respected them, and offered protection. "You do not understand," she whispered. "Some things cannot be fixed. Some pain stays with you." He remained silent, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps," he said finally. "But strength is not the absence of pain. Strength is moving forward despite it." The girl's heart pounded. His words were different from anyone else's. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever acknowledged her resilience. Yet there was also a warning, a subtle tension woven beneath his calm tone, that told her the world beyond the balcony was not as safe as it seemed. Days passed, and the Alpha King's attention became more intentional. He walked the halls near her quarters, often finding her in quiet spaces. The library, the garden, the chapel tucked into the castle's east wing. Each encounter deepened the fragile bond forming between them. She found herself speaking in fragments, revealing pieces of her story, her fears, her longing to belong somewhere. And he listened, not with pity but with careful attention, as if each word was a treasure to be guarded. It was in the chapel that the first real sign of danger appeared. The girl knelt by the altar, fingers brushing the cold stone, murmuring silent prayers. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that seemed to move on their own, and she felt a chill crawl along her spine. The Alpha King entered quietly, his presence immediately grounding the room. "You feel it too," she whispered, eyes wide. He nodded. "The shadows are restless," he said. "They stir when the past is unresolved. Your scars, they are more than skin deep." Her breath caught. She had suspected as much, yet hearing it aloud made her pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice trembling. He lowered himself beside her. "There is a mark within you," he said carefully. a trace of something older, something supernatural. It has lingered in your bloodline waiting, and now it begins to awaken. The girl's hands trembled. She had always felt different even before the scars, but she had never imagined such a thing. "Will it hurt me?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on hers. "Not if we face it together. You are not alone in this. I will protect you." The sincerity in his words stirred something deep within her. She wanted to trust him, to believe in his strength and care. And yet the fear of the unknown, the shadow of the curse she barely understood, made her hesitate. That night, the castle seemed to whisper with life. Shadows stretched across the halls, flickering in candlelight as if alive. The girl lay awake, recalling every moment of vulnerability, every glance from the Alpha King, and the strange, unspoken connection that tied them together. She felt exposed, yet strangely safe. The next day, he guided her through the castle's training halls. Not for combat, not for battle, but for control and awareness. "You must learn to command your fear," he said. "Not to suppress it, but to channel it. The curse will not be defeated by hiding." She followed him, hesitant at first, but gradually began to mirror his movements. There was a rhythm in his teaching, a patience that made her heart beat in a new way. Each step, each controlled breath, each practiced gesture brought her closer to understanding, not just her own strength, but the trust building between them. Yet danger was never far behind. One evening, as she returned to her quarters, a shadow flitted across the corridor. She froze, heart hammering, and instinctively turned to the Alpha King, who had been walking nearby. His eyes narrowed, body tense, as if reading the unseen threat. "They are here," he said quietly. "The ones tied to your past, they have not forgotten." Panic surged within her. "What do they want?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. He did not answer immediately. "Power is their desire, fear is their weapon, and you are their key." The weight of his words pressed down on her. Her scars were not just memories. They were markers, signs of something bigger, something that reached into the very foundations of the pack. And yet the Alpha King's presence was steady, his strength undeniable. That night she awoke to a soft, almost imperceptible glow surrounding her room. She sat up, alarmed, and found him standing near the window, eyes sharp, stance ready. "The curse stirs," he said, "and with it danger approaches." Her pulse quickened. "Can it be stopped?" He moved closer, lowering himself to meet her gaze. "It can," he said firmly, "but it will require more than strength. It will require trust, trust in me and trust in yourself." The girl swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and longing rising within her. She wanted to believe him, yet the shadows of her past clawed at her mind, whispering doubt and warning. She looked at her scars, tracing the pale lines that had once been a source of shame. Now they felt like a map of survival, of resilience, and perhaps of destiny. Over the next days, their bond deepened. He allowed her to speak of her past in fragments, never pressing, never demanding. And slowly, she began to share the story of her scars. The betrayal by someone she had once trusted, the harsh lessons of survival, the quiet loneliness that had marked her childhood. Each word, each confession, was a step toward healing, and he listened with patience, his presence a steady anchor in a turbulent world. One evening, as they walked through the castle gardens, the moonlight glinting on the frost-kissed leaves, she asked the question she had long avoided. "Why me?" He paused, considering carefully. "Because even the strongest king cannot ignore a life that suffers unjustly," he said. "Because you have endured more than many, and yet you remain unbroken. And because I see something in you that others have failed to notice, strength tempered by kindness, courage wrapped in quiet humility." Her heart ached at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this. She felt seen, acknowledged, and for a moment the loneliness that had defined her life began to fade. But shadows never stayed away for long. That night, as she slept, the castle's walls seemed to tremble. A distant murmur echoed through the halls, faint but unmistakable. Her dreams were filled with flickering images, shapes of people she had thought forgotten, voices she had tried to bury. She awoke with a start, heart racing, and the Alpha King was there, standing vigil as always. "They are closer than we thought," he said softly. "The curse, it stirs within you, and with it comes those who wish to harm. You are not merely a girl with scars. You are a key to something much larger." Fear and determination collided within her. She had survived this long, but the challenges ahead were unlike any she had faced. Yet the Alpha King's presence, steady and unwavering, gave her a strange courage. She would face the trials, not alone, but with him by her side. Cliffhanger. Outside the castle walls, a figure watched from the tree line shrouded in mist. Eyes glinting, intentions unclear, they whispered a name, the girl's name, and vanished into the darkness. The Alpha King's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The trial was only beginning, and the girl's courage, as well as their fragile bond, would be tested like never before. The castle had grown restless. Shadows lengthened unnaturally along the stone corridors, and whispers seemed to echo from corners long forgotten. The Beta's daughter moved through the halls with measured steps, her heart aware that danger was no longer a distant threat. It had arrived. Yet she was no longer entirely alone. The Alpha King's presence lingered in every step, a quiet shield, a steadying anchor in a world that had begun to feel uncertain and fragile. That evening, the Alpha found her in the castle's training hall, practicing movements he had taught her. Her steps were careful, her stance measured, but there was a determination in her eyes that had not been there before. Each motion was an act of defiance against the fear she had carried for so long, an affirmation of her growing strength. "You are improving," he said, voice calm but carrying its usual authority. She paused, breathing hard, and looked at him. "I want to be ready," she said softly, "for whatever comes next." He nodded. "You must be. The shadows are not idle, and the curse within you grows stronger. Soon you will need more than caution." Her fingers brushed at the pale scars on her arms, marks that had once been sources of shame but now felt like maps of survival. "It's not just about the curse," she murmured. "It's about everything I've been through." He studied her, noting the mix of vulnerability and quiet courage. "Yes," he said, "and you are not weak for acknowledging it. Strength is born from facing pain, not hiding from it." The lessons of the past days had done more than teach her skill, they had taught her trust. She had come to rely on the Alpha King's presence, his guidance, and, more subtly, his understanding. For the first time in her life, she felt a bond that was neither fear nor obligation, but something deeper, a connection built on shared acknowledgement of struggle and endurance. But the castle offered no rest. That night, as she slept, the shadows shifted more urgently, carrying whispers that reached her even through dreams. Shapes flickered in her vision, faces of those who had wronged her, echoes of betrayals that had left marks deeper than the eye could see. She awoke with a start, the room dimly lit by candlelight, and found the Alpha King watching silently, vigilant as always. "They come closer each night," he said, voice low. "The curse awakens, and with it those who seek to harm you." Her pulse quickened. "Can we stop it?" she asked, fear mingling with determination. "We can," he said firmly, "but it will require courage and not just yours. We will face this together." Days passed with increasing tension. The Alpha King led her through the castle, preparing her not only for self-defense, but for control over the awakening powers tied to her scars. She had begun to sense them, subtle pulses of energy, moments when shadows seemed to respond to her emotions, when her heartbeat could influence the flicker of candlelight. It frightened her at first, but he guided her patiently, teaching her to breathe, to focus, to channel what stirred inside. Their bond deepened during these sessions. He never pressed too hard, never demanded more than she could give. Yet every glance, every gentle correction, carried unspoken care. In turn, she began to open herself to him, revealing more of her past, the betrayals that had left her scars, and the loneliness she had carried so long. Each revelation brought them closer, weaving a connection that was both delicate and unbreakable. But danger waited beyond the castle walls. One night, a servant rushed to the Alpha King, breathless with warning. A figure had been seen near the eastern gate, someone cloaked, moving with purpose and silence, watching the castle. The Alpha's eyes darkened. "They are here," he said quietly. "Not just shadows, but those who seek to exploit what stirs within you." The girl's heart pounded. Fear surged, but alongside it was a spark of courage, honed by the training and guidance of the Alpha King. She no longer felt helpless. She understood in a way she had never before that she possessed strength, both in herself and in the bond she shared with him. The Alpha King gathered the guards and patrolled the walls, but he did not leave her behind. "You stay close," he instructed. "The danger is not merely physical. There are forces you cannot yet see, tied to the curse, tied to your scars. You must learn to sense them." She nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "I will not fail," she said, voice steady despite the fear that rippled beneath it. That night the castle trembled not with sound but with presence. Shadows moved unnaturally, and whispers slithered along the walls. The girl felt it first. A cold pulse beneath her skin, the stirring of something long dormant, something powerful and ancient. Her breath caught, and instinctively the Alpha King was at her side, hand resting lightly on her shoulder, grounding her. "You are ready," he said, voice firm yet calm. "Do not fear what you are, embrace it, control it." The energy within her responded to his words. It swirled, faintly visible, casting silver light across the room. She felt both awe and fear. She was no longer merely a girl with scars. She was a force in her own right, a bearer of something extraordinary. And though the power frightened her, she knew she would not face it alone. Suddenly, the distant sound of footsteps echoed through the hallways, sharp and deliberate. She stiffened. The Alpha King's hand moved instinctively toward his sword. Together they moved toward the source, shadows clinging to their steps. In the eastern hall a figure emerged, a ghostly silhouette cloaked in mist, face hidden, intentions unclear. The girl felt a pull, a recognition she could not name. The Alpha King stepped in front of her, protective yet ready to confront the unknown. "You should not be here," he said, voice sharp. The figure remained silent, but the air thickened with tension. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of its presence. The girl shivered, but the Alpha King's calm remained. "They will not stop," he said quietly, eyes darkening. "The curse calls to them and they will try again. But we are stronger than they know." In the following days, their training intensified. The girl learned to sense the energies around her, to anticipate the stirrings of shadows, to channel the pulse within her scars into a protective force. The Alpha King guided her with patience, teaching not just skill but trust. She began to rely on him not only for protection but as a mentor, a guide, and quietly as something more, a presence she could confide in, a strength she could lean on. Their bond did not go unnoticed. The castle's inhabitants whispered, rumors of the Alpha's unusual attention spreading quietly. Yet no one dared challenge him. And the girl, once hidden in the margins of the castle, began to stand taller, her courage growing alongside her powers. Then came the night of the first true trial. Shadows, drawn by the stirrings within her, surged against the castle gates. Figures cloaked in mist moved with unnatural precision, testing defenses, probing weaknesses. The girl sensed them immediately, her pulse sinking with the energy around her. Fear arose, but alongside it was determination, a knowledge that she could face this, and that she would not face it alone. The Alpha King led her to the forefront, standing as her shield, yet allowing her to act, to direct her newfound abilities. The air shimmered as her power responded to the shadows, pushing back against them, bending the darkness with her will. The castle trembled, alive with energy as she and the Alpha faced the threat together. The battle, though brief, left an indelible mark. Shadows retreated, yet the warning was clear. This was only the beginning. The curse within her was powerful, and those who sought to exploit it would not relent. She had faced the first trial, but many more awaited, each more dangerous than the last. As the night settled into quiet, the Alpha King and the girl stood together on the balcony, watching the moon reflect on the distant forests. She leaned slightly against him, exhaustion mingling with relief. "You have grown stronger," he said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "Not just in power but in courage, and not just in trust but in heart." Her gaze met his, and she felt a warmth she had not known before, a recognition, a connection that had grown through fear, trial, and shared endurance. "I could not have done it without you," she whispered. He placed a hand gently on hers. "And you will not face what comes next alone. The shadows are not finished, but neither are we." The castle, alive with quiet energy and lingering tension, seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the forest whispered of dangers yet unseen. And though they had faced the first trial together, both knew that the path ahead would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, sacrifice, and an unwavering bond that neither had fully realized until now. Cliffhanger, in the darkness beyond the castle, a figure watched silently, eyes glinting in the moonlight. They whispered her name with intent, and the wind carried a promise. The trials had only begun. The Alpha King's hand tightened on the balcony rail, and the girl's pulse quickened. Whatever waited for them beyond the walls, they would face it together, or not at all. The castle was silent, but the air thrummed with tension. Shadows moved unnaturally along the corridors, responding to the stirrings within the Beta's daughter. The curse, long dormant and faint, had reached its peak. Its energy pulsed through her veins, and she could feel it twisting, seeking release. The Alpha King stood near her, tall and steady, eyes sharp with vigilance, a living anchor amidst the swirling darkness. "This is it," he said quietly. "The moment we have been preparing for. The shadows will come, drawn to the power inside you. You must remain strong." Her fingers brushed the scars on her arms, scars that had once been marks of shame, now symbols of endurance. She inhaled deeply, the weight of fear heavy on her chest, but she drew courage from the Alpha King's unwavering presence. "I am ready," she whispered, her voice trembling yet firm. "I will not fail." The castle walls shook faintly as the first of the shadowed figures appeared. They emerged from the corners of the halls, mist-like and silent, eyes glinting with intent. The girl's pulse quickened, and instinctively she raised her hands. Energy pulsed from her, soft at first, then building like a river gaining strength. The shadows recoiled, as if sensing the power within her. The Alpha King stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her. "Do not fear," he said. "Focus, trust yourself and trust me." She nodded, closing her eyes briefly. She felt the energy within her respond, aligning with her heartbeat. Her scars seemed to glow faintly under her skin, traces of power and history intertwined. They were no longer marks of pain, but keys to controlling the curse, to protecting herself and those she cared for. The shadows surged. They moved with silent, predatory intent, reaching for her, drawn by the curse that had haunted her since childhood. She stood firm, summoning every ounce of strength, every lesson the Alpha had taught her. The energy within her flared, pushing back against the darkness. The Alpha King fought alongside her, not merely with sword or strength but with command, guiding her, protecting her, lending his presence as a shield. His confidence bolstered hers, and together they became a force neither shadow nor curse could ignore. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but they did not retreat completely. One figure, taller and darker than the rest, stepped forward. Its presence was chilling, familiar yet twisted. She recognized the shape, the intent. It was connected to her past, to the betrayal that had left the first scars. "You are stronger than I thought," the shadow hissed, voice echoing like wind through hollow halls. "I am not afraid," she said, voice steady, though her heart raced. I face what comes and I will not run. The figure lunged, but she raised her hands, energy erupting like silver fire. The Alpha King stepped closer, hand brushing hers, and together they pushed back. The shadows faltered, unable to penetrate the bond between them, the trust, the strength, the courage that had grown over days and nights of training, trials, and understanding. She remembered his words, the lessons he had instilled. Strength is born from facing pain. Trust is the shield that holds the world at bay. Energy surged from her, the glow of her scars brightening, illuminating the hall. The shadow shrieked and retreated, dissipating into mist. One by one, the others fled, unable to withstand the combined force of her power and the Alpha King's guidance. The hall fell silent again. The only sound was the echo of their breathing, heavy but steady. The girl sank to her knees, exhausted, yet exhilarated. She had faced the curse and emerged stronger, not alone, but with the one who had guided and protected her. The Alpha King knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said, voice soft yet firm. "You faced the shadows and you prevailed." She looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes, not of fear but relief, gratitude, and something deeper, a bond that had been forged in fire and shadows. "I could not have without you," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "No, you did this. I only helped you see what was already inside. Your courage, your strength, it is yours, not mine." They rose together, standing amid the silent halls of the castle, shadows scattered and powerless. The curse had been quelled, its energy stabilized within her, no longer a threat but a part of her, acknowledged, understood, and controlled. The Alpha King guided her to the balcony. Moonlight spilled across the frost-kissed stones, illuminating their faces. The air was cool, crisp, yet carrying a sense of peace that had not been present before. "Look at yourself," he said softly. "You are no longer the girl who trembled in the kitchen. You are stronger than the shadows, stronger than your past, and you are no longer alone." She gazed at the moon, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had endured so much, yet had emerged resilient, capable, and ready. For the first time in her life, she felt whole. I never thought I could feel safe," she said, voice trembling with emotion. "But with you, I feel something I never have before, protection, trust, even hope." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. "And you should," he said. "You have earned it. Every step you took, every fear you faced, every scar, it brought you here. And now you stand not as a victim of the past, but as the author of your future." The girl swallowed hard, realizing the depth of what he said. She had been afraid, ashamed, and cautious for so long. Yet here she was, standing with the man who had guided her through shadows, who had seen her scars and not recoiled, who had shown her that strength could coexist with compassion. "Will it truly be over?" she asked softly, doubt still lingering like a shadow. "For now," he said, eyes scanning the horizon. "The world is never without challenges, but you are ready, and I will be by your side always." Her chest tightened with gratitude, relief, and something more, an unspoken bond, a connection forged in trials and strengthened through trust. She reached out, and for the first time allowed herself to rest her hand in his. The castle, ancient and silent, seemed to breathe around them, the echoes of past shadows dissipating into memory. The wind whispered through the towers, carrying with it a sense of renewal. The scars that had once defined her pain now glimmered faintly in the moonlight, symbols of survival, resilience, and newfound strength. The Alpha King turned to face her fully, his dark eyes softening. "You are no longer hiding," he said. "No longer afraid, no longer alone. And for that I am proud." She smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and wonder. I am grateful," she said, "for everything." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "And I am grateful for you," he said quietly. "For your courage, your strength, and your heart. You have changed everything, even me." The air between them was heavy with unspoken emotion, a quiet understanding of what had passed and what had grown in the space between them. No words could fully capture it, yet both knew trust, courage, and shared trials had forged a bond that would endure beyond curses and shadows. The first rays of dawn broke across the horizon, casting golden light upon the castle walls. The shadows that had once haunted them dissipated into the morning, leaving clarity, peace, and the promise of new beginnings. The girl stood taller now, her scars a testament not to pain, but to survival, strength, and transformation. The Alpha King remained beside her, a steadfast presence, guardian and companion. Together, they faced the world, not as king and subject or protector and ward, but as two souls forever linked through trials, trust, and the quiet power of love that had grown amidst darkness. As the castle stirred to life with the dawn, a quiet breeze whispered through the halls, carrying a sense of renewal. The past had left its mark, but it no longer ruled them. They had faced the curse, embraced their strength, and discovered redemption, not just for the girl but for them both. Epilogue moment. The girl traced her scars gently, a small smile on her lips. The Alpha King's hand found hers, holding it firmly yet gently. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Together we can face whatever comes." And together they watched the sun rise, hearts steady, shadows behind them, and the world ahead full of promise. The curse had been conquered, but more importantly, their bond had been sealed. A bond forged in fear, strengthened by trust, and illuminated by the quiet dawn of healing and hope.